You are listening to RudolfSteinerAudio.com. As well, you can hear these podcasts at rudolfsteiner.podbean.com. Please consider becoming a patron. There are two publishing houses, steinerbooks.org in America and rudolfsteinerpress.com in England, which are the sole publishers of Steiner into English and have given me permission to do these recordings. Please consider patronizing them as well. This is a reading of Collected Works Volume 217A, entitled Youth and the Etheric Heart. Rudolf Steiner speaks to the younger generation. It is composed of addresses, essays, discussions, and reports given between 1920 and 1924, translated by Catherine Krieger. And this is an address given in Dornach on October 1st, 1920, entitled Toward Independent Scholarly Work. Address on the recently issued appeal to academic youth, given during the first anthroposophical higher education course at the Goetheanum. I'm sure you will understand that because the contents of the recently issued title Appeal to Academic Youth are so closely associated with me personally, I cannot really speak to them in any way. Instead, let me speak to you today about the impulse emerging among today's students to work toward new goals for academia and for society and culture in general. This appeal reminds me of another one that also originated in Stuttgart not long ago and called for the establishment of a cultural council. When our work in Stuttgart began in 1919, it was initially based on the, quote, appeal to the German people and culture, close quote, which I had formulated and released in March of the previous year, and on my attempts to provide guidelines for restructuring society entitled Toward Social Renewal, Collected Works Volume 23. A number of individuals supported this book's perspective and social goals. Their intention was to show the world the real need for a renewal of cultural affairs, the need to imbue cultural activity with new impulses, and they saw the establishment of a cultural council as one of the most pressing issues. As you know, title Toward Social Renewal points out that the highest aspiration of our time must be to raise a subconscious goal of modern humanity to the level of conscious activity. I refer to the threefold reordering of the body social. Anyone with a bit of insight into the undercurrents of human aspirations will sense that this book is not utopian in the least. As the product of 30 to 35 years of observation, it essentially presents nothing more than what most individuals want, or more accurately, would want if they followed their instincts and feelings, but have not yet confessed to wanting, because they somehow fear raising it to consciousness. We can see the need for new directions in all three domains of human activity: culture, politics and law, and economics. In my book, Toward Social Renewal, I attempted to demonstrate that the main obstacle to discovering these new directions is the idea that a monolithic state has to do everything. Over the past 3 or 4 centuries, this idea has become firmly implanted in our minds, and the state has gradually appropriated the system of higher education. But we must not forget that our education system actually developed directly out of cultural activity. Not all that long ago, the reputation of higher education was based on the productivity of individual universities. Just recall how people spoke of the law school in Bologna, the medical school in Salerno, or any of the other important universities. The international reputation of the higher education system was based on the unique accomplishments of individual universities. But through recent annexation by governments that have assumed more and more power, our system of higher education has been totally transformed to serve the outer needs of individual nation-states. Originally, the universities themselves determined the extent and character of their relationship to the state. A historical recollection of that time should still be alive in anyone who feels connected to the spiritual striving for knowledge, or to cultural aspirations in general. During the Age of Enlightenment in the late 18th and early 19th centuries, it was emphasized repeatedly that in the Middle Ages scholarship existed to serve theological and ecclesiastical activity. You know I am no follower of Kant, but this statement of his is worth mentioning. The time of academic disciplines serving as the train bearers of theology is over. Kant held that scholarly activity had become independent and was called upon to be the standard bearer for all other aspects of culture. But it was only after such statements became popular, out of legitimate resistance to religious activity in academic fields, that the trend emerged that has now transformed our system of higher education into the servant of politics, the state, and the legal system. I ask you, is it better to carry the train of theology, which is at least a spiritual and cultural element, or to carry the train of the political system? This judgment will be left to times still to come. Roughly a century after Kant's statement, the famous physiologist Émile Dubois-Reymond, then the president of the Berlin Academy of Science, said that the members of the Academy felt very honored to be called the scientific security squad of the Hohenzollerns. This statement is indicative of what I call, in quotes, state occupation of the higher education system. It goes without saying that the state's first concern is for its civil servants, not for scholarship. Recently, the president of the University of Halle published an essay that sheds a very strange light on changes during his tenure. He seemed to be somewhat informed about important events behind the scenes, because his very concerned and exhaustive editorial alerts us to a state plan to close a large number of German universities and replace them with training schools for civil servants. Such issues account for the rather pointed language of the Stuttgart call for a cultural council. State influence on the universities has not been limited to imposing unpleasant exams and deciding on the hiring of professors. It has even taken hold of academic disciplines themselves. It has taken hold of knowledge, of spirit itself. To rectify this situation, we issued this appeal to everyone we thought might have some sense or feeling for how to support and promote cultural affairs in general and the educational system in particular. Initially, the well-meaning and warm-hearted people who responded to this call hoped for insight and collaboration from the representatives of cultural activity, specifically university instructors. This collaboration was not actively forthcoming, and what the instructors said instead was quite surprising. They said that if the threefold organizing of the body social was accomplished and the independence of cultural affairs guaranteed, university instructors would have to replace the Minister of Education and his civil servants in the administration of the entire educational system. They said they preferred to be subject to ministry oversight than to the decisions and actions of their own colleagues, about whom they had very strange things to say. While exploring the opinions of university instructors, we had plenty of opportunity to hear what A had to say about B and B about A. In the end, there were very few people left who would have been trusted with the administration of an independent cultural body. This experience was quite depressing. As you may know, the entire appeal, in spite of its good intentions, turned out to be just a waste of paper, because we found virtually no cultural workers willing to advocate for the independence of cultural activity. Even externalities reveal the changes in recent decades, though many people still have not recognized them for what they are. Let me simply emphasize that the result of an academic education was once an expression of the striving for scholarship and knowledge itself. The degrees granted by various schools and departments had something to do with striving for knowledge. But now it is evident that the system of state exams has infiltrated the process of getting a degree to such an extent that the scholarly content has been reduced to mere decoration. Initially, of course, such issues are merely symptomatic. As symptoms, however, they clearly demonstrate that cultural affairs have been largely subsumed by external political activity. You can be quite sure that our present state system will kill off the universities because it does not need them as such, as havens of scholarship and knowledge. They will all be transformed into training schools for civil servants because that is all the state needs. That is the current trend. Such statements are always taken for doomsaying or false prophecy, but it is important to see where we are heading. Law schools are becoming schools for civil servants, and medical schools are attempting to turn healers into mere cogs in the state machinery. And what about philosophy departments? What are they good for, if not to prepare people to be instructional civil servants, rather than teachers? In democratic Germany, that model country, we do not even call our instructors teachers or professors anymore. These are superficial details, but they reflect the intrinsic spirit of academia. It is truly disheartening to discover that our teachers have absolutely no feeling for the importance of independent cultural activity. When I hear the appeal coming toward us from students, I experience this state of affairs as a reproach. To put it bluntly, if old people are not going to make changes, then the young must feel it as their sacred duty to advocate for independent cultural activity. Because if no one insists on a renewal of knowledge based on original sources, the situation will certainly be very bad by the time our civilization's next generation grows up. It is indeed significant that Oswald Spengler, a highly intelligent man, applied a great deal of energy and disciplined scholarly methods to proving that Western civilization is heading toward barbarism. Needless to say, all this is a tremendous burden on you young people, who cannot be allowed to become adults with blind faith in authority. You must have your eyes wide open to see what is going on in the institutions you attend to prepare yourselves for life. Apart from the portions of the appeal that relate to me personally, it made a good impression that followers, rather than old leaders, were taking a stand and making concrete statements about what they want. Tirades and rhetoric will not make cultural activity independent. Taking back what the state has absorbed is imperative, but it will happen only if our cultural activity possesses real energy. In the age of materialism, academia was impotent to resist being sucked in by the state. Similarly, sciences that remain materialistic will also remain impotent to resist being dragged into barbarism by the state ambition to absorb them. Only some positive force will succeed in extricating the spirit of science, the spirit of knowledge, from the quagmire of politics. Material science has fallen prey to unscientific forces, but it can be rescued by the intrinsic strength and character of spiritual science. Only spiritual science is in a position to establish an independent cultural life within the body social. Of course, those of you who signed this appeal must realize that others will experience it as a breaking storm, especially since it comes from you. But it takes a storm to accomplish anything today. Without the will and the courage to make transformation happen where it is needed, we will not be able to move forward. Instead, we will fall into decline and barbarism. You must not expect your appeal to be accepted with good grace in all quarters. But surely you realize, all of you who signed it with full hearts and courageous souls, that an appeal received with goodwill would accomplish nothing. You must be prepared to fight for what you must want, for what is right. Strange things have been known to happen when young, aspiring minds are drawn into the machinery of cultural affairs. I could think of many examples, but will tell you only one, a little scene that took place at a university when a young philosophy instructor went to the department chair, who thought well of him, to apply for promotion to a professorship. He suggested a subject for his inaugural lecture, but the department chair, who really did want to see him become an assistant professor, said to him, quote, "That really won't do. I can't recommend you to my colleagues. They'd have my neck. You've written only about 19th century events and personalities in philosophy. We can't make you an assistant professor until you've written about much older topics," close quote. Quote, "Well," said the young PhD, "what should I do now? I thought what I'd written about Schopenhauer, born in 1788, and the development of aesthetics in the 19th century would be suitable. Surely the Viennese in the department will know whom I'm talking about." Close quote. Quote, "But you know," said the department chair, "what you write about isn't important. It just has to be something old and unfamiliar. Let's see if we can find some old unknown Italian aesthetician." Close quote. So they opened the encyclopedia to the letter G and found the name Gravina. Neither of them knew anything about him, but the department chair thought he would be just the right subject for a professorial dissertation. So the young PhD wrote on the very interesting subject of a totally unknown and insignificant Italian aesthetician who was born in 1807, and then the department chair approved his assistant professorship. This all took some time, however, a year and a half, I believe, because it was no easy matter to show the accomplishments of this unknown aesthetician in the right light. This is an extreme example, but it is only one among many. Let us consider the gradual disappearance of all freedom of choice with regard to dissertation topics. In the field of modern languages, for example, Wilhelm Scherer systematized the entire topic selection process. A student requesting a topic is simply assigned one regardless of his particular expertise or interest. The topic is chosen purely on the basis of its usefulness to some professor or other who wants to draw on individual dissertations for an exhaustive book on the subject. To a greater extent than we might believe, this outer practice is indicative of the inner process of our cultural life. I believe I am not mistaken when I say that the best thing you could do would be to counteract this mindset with a fresh new approach to scholarly work. You could form study circles that would do real basic original research using all the aids and sources available to you. My advice to you, should you want it, would be to form local groups of students who want to work out of this spirit. If scholarship and knowledge are to flourish again, interdisciplinary efforts will be needed. Chemists, physicists, philosophers, law students, historians, and philologists will all have to contribute to work on common themes. If you wish, those of us involved in the higher education courses in Dornach will help establish an independent committee of people who have lectured on various branches of knowledge enriched by anthroposophically oriented spiritual science. This committee would suggest topics to be addressed next, not in the way that dissertation topics are now assigned, but simply on the basis of what is needed in the general cultural life of humanity. The ultimate choice, of course, would always be up to the individual. Committee members with some experience would suggest what is needed, and individuals would be free to choose topics they feel especially suited to address. This arrangement would permit ongoing collaboration and independent cultural and scholarly exchange between the pioneers of an independent higher education system here in Dornach and students who are interested in and enthusiastic about the impacts of spiritual science on Western cultural life and civilization. This is a rough description of an initial positive way of using academic work to transform the words of your appeal into a reality. It is not yet time for more detailed advice, but you can rest assured that those who are already working out of anthroposophically oriented spiritual science, both here and in Stuttgart, will be ready at any moment to put all their energy into promoting, supporting, advising, and collaborating. In short, they will do whatever is necessary to help enthusiastic students everywhere to contribute to our monumental ideal, to the great, intense, and comprehensive task of using renewed spiritual research based on original sources to guide human spiritual life. And thus, human culture and civilization in general toward an ascent or dawn, not the decline or dusk that many believe to be inevitable. Having promised you that I will do everything in my power to encourage intense yet harmonious scholarly collaboration, let me now answer the question that was addressed to me. What is the first positive step that I would advise you to accomplish? If we truly work together in this way, students themselves will accomplish what their supposed leaders unfortunately cannot. If these leaders do not prove to be such leaders, then a good training in freeing yourself from all faith in authority is what you must go through if you want to have as your foundation free scientific work. If you stand on this foundation, I can predict that you will work very well together with spiritual science and with the intentions of those in Dornach and Stuttgart. I speak to you today out of this conviction. That's the end of the first address. I'm going to call this part 1 of the book.
Havoc's been unleashed at SeaWorld's Hollow Scream. With 17 haunts, including 2 new haunted houses and all new scare zones, only at SeaWorld's Hollow Scream. Save up to 50% on tickets. Hurry, offer ends soon.
You are listening to RudolfSteinerAudio.com. As well, you can hear these podcasts at RudolfSteiner.podbean.com. Please consider becoming a patron. There are 2 publishing houses, SteinerBooks.org in America and RudolfSteinerPress.com in England, which are the sole publishers of Steiner into English and have given me permission to do these recordings. Please consider patronizing them as well. This is a reading of Collected Works Volume 217A by Rudolf Steiner, entitled Youth and the Etheric Heart, Various Addresses and Essays by Rudolf Steiner. This is part 2, and it is an address entitled Humanizing Academic Life, address on the last day of the first anthroposophical higher education course, given in Dornach on October 16th, 1920. Translated by Catherine Krieger. As this event draws to a close, it is evident how heavily anthroposophically oriented spiritual science is counting on you. We are counting on you because academia, which has placed us in our current situation, is the only institution capable of counteracting the impending demise of Western civilization. I do not want to spend much time demonstrating that the destructive anti-cultural institutions of modern times are essentially products of scholarly activity, because this connection is already obvious enough. We do not need to talk about it here, but there is something else we should consider. It is also self-evident that the proletariat must be included in any restructuring of society today. In a public lecture in Stuttgart, I once said something that caused considerable offense, both locally and in broader circles. I said that the bourgeoisie is suffering from brain decadence and is therefore absolutely dependent on replacing physical brain work with the spiritualized work of the etheric brain. This is as obvious as anything can possibly be. In contrast, the brains of the upwardly mobile proletariat have not yet become decadent. If we can convert them to brain work, proletarians are still capable of working out of the physical brain. Of course, these statements caused offense in bourgeois circles. But the point nowadays is not to avoid giving offense, but to bring the truth to light. The modern proletariat, however, is Janus-faced, to use a rather grotesque expression. How does this two-sided character manifest? On the one hand, proletarians always tend to say, quote, "We don't want to know anything. about what you academics are trying to tell us. It's too difficult for us, and we're just not interested." Close quote. On the other hand, these proletarians have been fed exclusively on the waste products of 19th and early 20th century scholarship. Waste products are all they have to work with. We must make every effort to see their situation in this light. It will not be easy to make the results of our serious scholarship accessible to the proletariat. But if we do not allow ourselves to be scared off, if we persist in the social action of winning the proletariat over to intellectual activity, we will be able to introduce them to this healthy element just as surely as they were introduced to Marxism and Bolshevism. We must simply not give up prematurely. We must persist in doing what we have recognized as right. Because this has always been my precept in anthroposophical work, I have never compromised. I am fully aware that my rejection of dilettantism has made enemies, but there was no way around it. If someone felt it worth the effort, it would be very easy to prove that the bulk of our current enemies are people I once rebuffed because of excessive dilettantism. That is what you would find if you looked into the details. Admittedly, that would require some compensation for memory, which is no longer so highly developed, as you realize when you tackle spiritual scientific training. You learn how to assess your enemies, who often appear out of nowhere years later. If you are not afraid to persist in doing what you know to be right, you will also have success with the proletariat. Proletarians are simply suffering from an exaggerated feeling of authority. As soon as you get them on their own, you will be able to win them over. At present, the biggest hurdle is convincing these people that their leaders, big and small, are their greatest enemies. Parasites, in fact. Once we succeed in convincing them, we will probably be able to interest the proletariat in our healthy scholarship. In fact, they will be an exceptionally good audience. Of course, the proletarian masses will have to be the audience for a long time to come. But now, I want to draw your attention to a different issue. You see, in my years of activity in the anthroposophical movement, I have always attempted to bring anthroposophy together with specialized academic disciplines, but I have always encountered difficulties. Let me give you a few specifics. Many years ago, an expert in the field of Oriental and Assyrian studies became enthusiastic about anthroposophy. It goes without saying that we expected him to make some connection between his field of expertise and his newfound enthusiasm, but he could not bring himself to do it. He could not be persuaded to bridge the gap between these two areas of study. He forged ahead in both fields, but was unable to bridge the gap. Nonetheless, it is absolutely necessary to attempt to find or to build this bridge, and we will find it. It must be possible to gain access to every academic discipline through anthroposophy. In a similar instance, I once knew a very famous professor of botany who was also an ardent theosophist. This man wrote books on botany in addition to writing about theosophy. He belonged to the Theosophical Society, not the Anthroposophical Society, so he wrote about theosophy after the manner of Annie Besant. As soon as he closed his books on theosophy, he was a botanist through and through. But when he lectured or wrote about theosophy, he was the consummate theosophist, and no one could tell that he was also a botanist. I sometimes brought up the subject of botany as a prelude to bridging the gap, but he was actively averse to talking about it with me. You see, this, quote, double-entry bookkeeping, close quote, as I always call it, is a consequence of the culture of a century ago. People want to write about everything related to their professional life in professional journals, and everything related to feeling, to the, in quotes, inner person, in the Sunday supplements to the newspaper. Politics falls somewhere in between. In keeping with the current version of the threefold ordering of society, they want to get their politics from the newspaper itself. It is most important to see through these things. In a certain sense, though the issue will not always be so cut and dried, you yourselves may be best qualified to find the bridge. As early as the turn of the 18th to the 19th century, poor Hölderlin put it very beautifully. He said that when he looked around at his Germany, he saw civil servants everywhere, along with factory owners, cabinet makers, and tailors, but no human beings. He saw scholars, artists, teachers, and so forth, but no human beings. Today we might say that this is especially true of the academic professions. There are no human beings there. We have academic disciplines and scholars drifting around us as if they were real, but to the extent that we feel human, we live almost entirely outside our academic knowledge. Just think about what people do today when they sum up all their scholarly knowledge to write a paper or apply for promotion to a professorship. What do? They cannot just sit down and write about whatever flows out of their souls, because there is no place for that in an academic work. They would soon be accused of writing off the cuff, and you are not allowed to write off the cuff. To write your dissertation, you must study books you would not bother opening otherwise. Even for your dissertation, you might simply look for quotations and note the pages instead of actually reading the books. Your relationship to your subject is supposed to remain as superficial as possible. You are not supposed to develop an intimate relationship to it. When people engaged in this type of work get together after hours, well, I could tell you stories about strange encounters I had in Weimar while working in the Goethe and Schiller archives. As soon as anyone mentioned anything related to Goethe or any scholarly subject whatsoever, someone would say, quote, "Here we go again, talking shop. Cut it out," close quote. The whole purpose of getting together seemed to be to avoid getting a reputation for talking shop. This attitude, however, is in large part responsible for our current situation. In the 7 years I spent in Weimar, I found very little difference between nationalities in this respect. When Mr. Thomas, who came from the far west, from an American university, wrote about Goethe's title Faust, his work and thinking were essentially international. There was no way to distinguish them from those of any student of Schmidt or Scherer. The only thing that distinguished him as an American was the fact that he sat cross-legged on the floor to get to the books on the bottom shelf. In all other respects, he did his work just like everyone else. The only exception was a Russian privy councillor. No one was sure what he was researching. Whenever he came into a bar in the evening, people said to each other, quote, "Don't turn around, the privy councillor's here," close quote. People avoided sitting with him because he always started talking about what he knew about Faust. Now, these seemingly trivial incidents are actually more important than we might imagine. If we considered many more such examples, they would explain many gradual developments in academic life. But this is exactly what we want to get away from. We certainly do not want to become pedants or people who talk shop all the time, but we must realize that human beings take precedence over all academic disciplines. As human beings, we must not allow ourselves to be tyrannized by academic knowledge. In our efforts to emancipate cultural activity, we are combating the abstract character of academia as such, and placing human beings first. Our academic knowledge will develop beyond what Boelcke described as immortal knowledge. He proposed a spiritual science of sorts, but he went looking for it in libraries, where the actual spirits are hidden behind paper and printer's ink. Humanizing academic activity is our goal. We must work toward bringing the human being to the fore in so-called objective scholarship, which must be grounded in life and in human beings. Those of us who engage in it must not become dry and shriveled. On the contrary, by, quote, combating abstract existence, close quote, as I call it, we become useful contributors to the very necessary process of counteracting the barbarization of Western civilization. This is what is most essential for those entering academic professions or occupations supported by academic disciplines. It is also why I believe it will be such a great blessing if you form groups in your individual universities and independently tackle themes as we attempt to do in anthroposophical groups, especially in the Waldorf School. I imagine these study circles as something very different from being like a school. We will attempt to bring together different threads from the fabric of the necessities of our time. We will draw from the total context of our culture in suggesting topics. Certain members of our Waldorf School faculty will stay in contact with those who have lectured here and will collaborate with them to discover topics that need to be addressed today. They will then suggest to you, our student members, certain tasks that seem necessary from the perspective of insights available in our circles. What happens next will not be like getting assignments. It will be an attempt to get to the bottom of issues that are especially critical today. There will be real opportunities for scholarly work. But I want to emphasize that establishing little scholarly circles that are, or at least claim to be, working on these topics is not enough. Of course, they must happen. They can and will be very useful. But alongside them, we need a large-scale movement of student groups, a movement that is truly aware that young people simply cannot continue to abide by the intentions of people who come out of older times and old traditions, the people who are now sitting in academic offices. I mentioned that the Social Democrats need to get rid of their leaders. It is equally necessary for young people today to get rid of their old leaders, and that will be more difficult to accomplish than it actually should be. You see, I cannot avoid mentioning the crucial point. Please understand that I am telling you this in complete honesty and sincerity. You can rest assured that it would be easy to advance our anthroposophically oriented spiritual movement if we were free to work only for Spirit, and if Spirit were all that spurred us on. Meanwhile, we are not the people who are assigning posts, granting degrees, and allowing students to fail their state exams. Other people are doing that. This is an important factor that we certainly do not underestimate. We know very well how much courage and audacity it takes for prospective academicians and intellectual workers to join us and stay with us, because we still have very little to offer. The situation will improve as our individual initiatives really begin to pull their own weight. When the Waldorf School was founded, I commented that its founding was all well and good, but it would be meaningless if we did not open at least 10 additional schools in the next quarter year. Only then would the Waldorf School be truly established. The need is clear, and that is why you must find the courage to ally yourselves in some way with our intentions. But on the other hand, I am thinking in practical terms about how the Waldorf School was founded. Once we are really in a position to emancipate cultural activity, there will be more and more Waldorf schools, and then we will be able to offer our young graduate friends a future. I am not being at all unidealistic when I say this. Until then, reciprocal support is essential. Our work to establish independent schools, up to and including institutions of higher learning, will be successful only if we meet with understanding on the part of students. For that we need not just small groups, but a large-scale student movement to support our intentions. Since I always pursue practical ideas, not just ideas that one can simply hand down, I have considered the possibility of our schools employing people who tackled their studies as Dr. Stein did. As he tells it, he registered for courses, attended the first few lectures to see what was going on, and then spent the rest of his time studying my lecture cycles and works quoted in them, and managed to complete his academic course of study in that way. Of course, his approach is not universally applicable, because probably only 3/4 of the professors would tolerate it if all their students were like Dr. Stein, showing up only for the first 3 lectures and then taking a hike. This approach is not realistic for the general public, and so I will not recommend it. Nonetheless, I want to suggest to you that the spirit now occupying lecterns in our university lecture halls has no future if it is transferred to elementary and secondary classrooms. During this conference, I told you about the World School Association. I want you to know that I take its founding very seriously. I imagine this association as international in scope, arising out of people's thoughts and feelings about cultural activity. In reality, there are only 2 competing movements in the world today. One is Bolshevism, which is leading the world into a morass. The other is the threefold organizing of the body social. If we can convince the world of this dichotomy, people will be forced to make a choice as soon as they realize that old impulses are going nowhere. Those who want to advance culture in any sensible way must gradually get used to the idea of a threefold social order. If they do not, if they are too lazy to do that, then Bolshevism will inundate Europe and barbarize European culture. Once people understand this, it will be easier to win them over than it is now. In this connection, there are 3 things we really must consider. When we speak to the international community about a project such as our building in Dornach, and the fact that we need money for it, the reaction is, quote, "We mustn't be so petty as to donate money for undertakings based on pure idealism. Money is much too filthy to be used for such an idealistic project." Close quote. In other words, without lengthy preparation, people are not prepared to contribute. Given the current situation in Central Europe, we cannot raise sufficient funds here to complete our building. So we are dependent on other parts of the modern civilized world, where people are tight-fisted and not prepared to donate. In contrast, it is relatively easy to solicit donations for sanatoriums, for example. If you are building a sanatorium, you can get as much money as you want. The middle way is what I am hoping for with the World School Association. That association, if rightly understood, will be able to finance all sorts of cultural facilities. Because people understand schools better than they understand something like our building, we must agitate on behalf of the middle ground. That is why advanced preparation or drumming up support for the founding of this World School Association is so important. I believe that the best thing you students could do would be to become enthusiastic and convince everyone you meet of the need for an international World School Association and of the importance of its task, which is to emancipate cultural activity and to finance as many independent schools as possible all over the world. The emancipation of cultural activity must happen on the largest possible scale. We must succeed in liberating ourselves from cultural subjugation, but we can do so only by actively drumming up support for the idea. The tyranny is greater than we think. I myself will initiate the founding of the World School Association here, but this effort must be preceded by mustering support. Nothing can be achieved today by working in groups of 12 or 15 people. Everything depends on the broadest possible dissemination of the idea that a World School Association must come about. Of course, I realize students do not have very deep pockets, and I am not asking you to donate. That is what other people are there for. But even if you cannot open your wallets, you can open your mouths. If you talk up the World School Association wherever you go, our request will not fall on deaf ears. When we approach people in the near future about founding the association, they will be primed and receptive. This is what has to happen. You see, we have plenty to do. We need nothing more than real courage and an independent view of the world. Why should we not use youthful energies to overcome the obstacles that threaten to bring us to our knees, especially when those obstacles bear the imprint of times past? We cannot allow ourselves to be brought to our knees. We must realize that we are dancing on a razor's edge today, or on a volcano if you prefer.